Hi there, I'm Jen. This is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be a TBR/library haul for Nonfiction November. Nonfiction November is, of course, the brainchild of Olive from a Book Olive, and is the annual month that encourages people to either read more nonfiction than they usually do, or if they read a lot, you might want to read nothing but nonfiction, or, if you never read any, then maybe read one thing. Read the manual to your car, that would count. I usually read a lot of nonfiction, so of course this is always a favorite time of year on BookTube for me. I'm going to save the library haul for the second part of this video, and I'm going to start with some books that I own and that I have picked up and put down because I had to get to library books. So these are going to be some books that I've started but need to finish. And first up I have Susan M. Schweik's The Ugly Laws, Disability in Public. This is a history that is a little bit on the academic side, but I think is still accessible to a popular audience that looks at, as the title says, the ugly laws, which were a series of laws in the United States, mostly in the 19th century, that made it illegal for visibly disabled people to be in public and to live in public. And the complications of that and the political ramifications, both in terms of broader social movements towards eugenics, the social attitudes towards certain immigrant groups, social attitudes towards things like veterans when they're talking about the US Civil War, things like that. I made it about a third of the way through this book, so I'm looking forward to getting back to this one because it is interesting stuff. I put that one aside for a bit because it is very kind of unrelentingly a US American history, and there are a number of points in there where I did think, I wonder what this looked like in X country, Y country, especially when they get into the bits about different immigrant groups in New York City. And then I was wondering, well, how was that back there? And in running off to the library to look up other things, I ended up putting that one down. Another book that I started, I think, a couple of years ago now and never finished is City of Lies, Love, Sex, Death, and the Search for Truth in Tehran by Ramita Navai. I only read, I think, the introduction and the first chapter of this, but as I recall, the author is looking at individual women and asking and following them through their lives. So it is, how would you put this? It's journalism, but it is journalism with an eye towards the personal, and then the personal as the political rather than the political as the personal. And I think touches on certain issues that I think are more in kind of the international media with regard to women in Iran now. So I think it would be interesting in that context to finally finish that one. And kind of topical in a different way, since the World Cup is also starting in November, I thought I would read some sports-themed books as well. First up, Eduardo Galeano's Football in Sun and Shadow. He was a Uruguayan writer, and this is a series of essays, an homage to the romance and drama, spectacle and passion of the great pagan mass, as it's described. This was translated by Mark Freed, and the blurb on this describes it as sport's answer to 100 Years of Solitude, which is a really funny blurb. So that should be fun. On a similar theme, I have 8 World Cups, My Journey Through the Beauty and Dark Side of Soccer by George Vesey, who is a US sports reporter. And so this book is looking at a memoir on the reporting that he had done for the 8 World Cups leading up to 2014. So, and this should be fun because I don't read a lot of soccer/football writing from US authors, so that should be interesting. And less topical for the World Cup, but still on the football theme. One of these days I'm going to finish The Passion, Football and the Story of Modern Turkey by Patrick Ketty. This is, I am about halfway through this one. This is a history which is mostly about club football in Turkey and the evolution of the professional sport alongside the modern nation from the 20s through to the current day. And it was very entertaining when I was reading it, so I don't know why I put that one down, but I will be excited to get back to that. Now we'll have some things that maybe are not on a theme. A book that is more in line with a lot of the usual stuff that I talk about. This is They Would Never Hurt a Fly, War Criminals on Trial by Slavica Drakulic. And this is a book in which she went to observe the War Crimes Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and is trying to work out how things happened. She's interesting in that she had published How We Survived Communism and Almost Laughed, which is an essay collection, right in 1992 as the wars that resulted in the independent nations that exist now were starting. And she was one of those people who hadn't expected it to happen. I think that's one of the things when you read writers who were working in the last days of Yugoslavia. You see some people who kind of thought that the breakup was inevitable and that the wars and the ethnic cleansing were inevitable, and some people who were completely shocked. And she was on the completely shocked side. So I think it'll be really interesting to read this. This is from 2004, so I think that should be interesting. On a similar theme, this is The Balkans, Nationalism, War, and the Great Powers, 1804 to 2012, by Misha Glenny. It's described as a lively history of Balkan geopolitics. This is not exclusively about the former Yugoslavia. I borrowed this from my fake uncle. I say my mother's best friend's husband, who is Slovenian, and he had read and enjoyed this, and we were talking about Balkan politics over dinner, as one does, and offered to lend me this one. So yeah, this talks about other non-Yugoslav, non-ex-Yugoslavian Balkan countries as well, and I eagerly look forward to that, because going through, the 19th and 20th century is really fascinating stuff, because you get all that turnover from Ottoman to Austrian to independent to Cold War and post that. Anyway, so that should be good. It is very long, so I don't know that I'll finish it this month, but I should. But that is one I should prioritize, since I do need to give it back to him. Talking about peace and war, another book that I started a while ago. I had this in my car and was reading it at stops and never got very far in it, because it's frankly, the print in this edition is really tiny. This is Edward Said's Peace and Its Discontents, Essays on Palestine and the Middle East Peace Process. And this was originally published in 1993, which again is an interesting period in that history. I think I picked this up when I said I was going to reread Orientalism, and instead I started reading this, which I then didn't finish. I found some more discounted Archipelago Press books at Book Outlet, and one of those was Josep Pla's Saltwater, which is a very long series of, I had originally thought nature writing, but I think it's closer to just musings on travel. This is translated from the Catalan by Peter Bush, and it seems to be about his observations as he travels along the coast in Catalonia, in northern Spain. I have a friend in Houston who's Catalan, and he would be very offended that I called it northern Spain, because he's a hardcore independence person. But sorry, Armand. He's not watching this. I don't know. Memoir / travelogue, I guess, is a better way to describe this. We're almost to the end of the stuff that I own here. Next up, I have Omar Muallim's Praying to the West, How Muslims Shaped the Americas. I saw this author talk at the Fold, the Festival of Literary Diversity here in the GTA. I didn't go in person this year. It's normally in Brampton, but I went to the online session. I attended it? I don't know. What's the right phrasing of that? In any case, and this is a book that is framed through elements of memoir, but it's mostly about the history of, what am I saying? And this author is Canadian. I think he's from out west. Is he? Yeah, he's from Edmonton. And he is looking at various Muslim communities in the Americas, in Canada, but also in the US and in Brazil and in other places, and looking at various periods in history, while also interweaving bits of memoir-y thing. All right, last two of the owned books. These are two of Turid Rugas's books on canine communication. She is a canine behaviorist who I have heard referenced by a number of different dog trainers, and both people I've met in real life and also kind of known dog trainers. She was very big in, well, I don't want to say in the early days of, because I think it's one of those things that's cyclical in terms of dog training, but she's very much on the positive reinforcement side, and wrote on that at a time when there was a lot more corrections-based training in the mainstream, and I think a lot of that has shifted. She wrote in Norwegian, and I believe the way these were translated is she wrote a version in English, and then her UK editor smoothed her English version. In any case, these are On Talking Terms with Dogs, Canine Signals, and Barking the Sound of a Language. I think I, like a lot of people who have dogs, think you know more than you do a lot of the time, and I think it's always useful to explore how much you know, especially recently. If you follow me on Instagram, you have seen I've been doing more formal training with my current dog now than I have with my past dogs, And so because of that, I've been meeting more dog trainers and people who are talking about different styles of dog training. So that's been really interesting. So I've wanted to read more just because, I really haven't read that much about dogs since I was a child. And a lot of the way we talk about training and philosophies towards that has shifted a lot. I have talked about kind of canine behavior and neurology books that I've read before on this channel, but I haven't really read any of the basic stuff in years and years, which gives me a good lead-in because one of the library books that I'm going to talk about is Good Dog 101. This has a foreword by Jean Donaldson, who is another one of the people that gets mentioned all of the time. And this book, which has a really long subheading, A Humane Approach to Changing Your Dog's Behavior, including methods to handle problems such as, and then a whole list. And I think that's really interesting because, again, I believe it's all based in the positive reinforcement side of things. And I think behavior modification is the one area where you do still see a lot of corrections-based stuff. So again, I'm interested in reading that because I have read more about the corrections-based stuff 30 years ago. So that should be good. And also on kind of the practical side of things, I'm taking a class through the library right now that is on urban agriculture and gardening. And so I've taken a bunch of books out that are for that class. They were recommended by the instructor. So first up, I have Botany for Gardeners, an Introduction to the Science of Plants, which has some fantastic full-color illustrations. If you follow me on Instagram, I've been posting a lot of updates about my cucumbers, which I planted in a bunch of different areas and had very different results with, depending on where they were. And I did it in kind of a haphazard way, so I'm looking to learn more about that. And I think this is kind of a Botany for Dummies kind of book, but with a lot prettier illustrations, because the actual For Dummies books are always black and white. Along the same lines, this is Square Foot Gardening, which is a method of gardening that's specifically designed for having high yield plants in a relatively small area. So the kind of urban horticulture on a very small scale and everything. And this has everything from what to plant to how to build trellises, and again, full color, nicely illustrated. And as I said, this was recommended by the instructor for my course. And another one is the Vegetable Gardener's Container Bible, which is for, as you can see on the cover, container gardening. I do have a garden to grow things in, but not a large one. So, look at again, great pictures in here. So this is interesting and hopefully practical. So next year, maybe my garden will be even more successful. I did get some cucumbers. I am not complaining about my first time growing cucumbers. All right, a couple more library books. Next up, I have Daniel Hahn's Catching Fire, a Translation Diary. Daniel Hahn has done a number of translations for books that are published by Charco Press, as this is, which is a UK publisher that puts out a lot of work translated from either Spanish or Portuguese, Latin American writers. This is, I believe, specifically a diary of his translation choices of one particular work, but I've read a number of things that he's translated, so I'll be interested to see just what his philosophy is and all of that, because I'm always curious about whenever you have an afterword or an introduction from the translator in a book, I'm always curious to read that. And I mean, I've talked a lot recently about complaining about translation choices in the BookTube Prize translation category, and also talking about the politics of translation when I was reading some of Amil Alcala's, both his own work and his translation work. So I'll be interested to see this, because I think an in-depth look at translating a single piece of work will be interesting, because some of the questions it points out on the back is what happens when you meet a pun or a double entendre, because you have to make choices there. Are you going to keep the sound of the language? Are you going to keep the meaning of the pun? The pun isn't going to translate. It's like, yeah, so that should be really interesting. Finally, I have Lee Lakshmi Peepsna Samara Sinha's The Future is Disabled, Prophecies, Love Notes, and Morning Songs. This is the writer who did Care Work and also A Pile of Poetry, which is all around the theme of disability justice. This book, I believe, was mostly written in and since 2020, And part 1 is called Disability Justice in the End Times. And then Disability Justice Arts in the Interregnum and the Disabled Future. And I think especially the forward-looking stuff should be interesting, because I think there is a lot of disability justice writing that is very focused on the immediate and the present. So it'll be interesting to see that particular social model, political model, looking forward in a really obvious way, because I think a lot of stuff that is about the immediate present is about the future, in the sense that if you don't do something right now, there isn't a future for the individuals involved or whatnot. But this is obviously a lot more direct about that, so that should be interesting. I think that is everything in my pile. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear what you thought. If you have made a TBR video or a Pile of Possibilities video for Nonfiction November and I haven't seen it, let me know, because I always enjoy watching these. And yeah, let me know what you're reading for Nonfiction November, or if you're reading on a theme like vegetable gardening or the World Cup or something. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.